according to, in my own research, as I may have told you, I'm working on an autobiography of my life, and I've begun to do research in my own archives, my own personal files, and I found that historians are now writing about the American Revolution, say that at this moment in time, here in September 1825, only 10% of the veterans are still with us. And that was why it was so incumbent upon me in my last remaining time in the White House to invite General Lafayette back to the United States on the anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the American Revolution. And that, of course, follows a very divisive election, as we all know, late November, early December 1824, that led to much discord and lack of harmony among our citizens and also among the candidates, the 4 candidates who were participating in the election.
Yes.
And I felt it comfortable myself to find a way to reacquaint our citizenry with the important ideas, the important things in life, rather than acrimony and dispute and discord. And that is why Lafayette came back, and we're very happy to have had him here. It's a sad reality that you and I may have seen the last of him, because he is 68, I am 67. I will not reveal your age, sir, in respect. But the time and distance involved in travel, and we're not getting any younger, so.
The Marquis was here at this house last year in 1824 and graced us again this past year before taking leave of Virginia. He was a remarkably enthusiastic individual. My first acquaintance with him was back in 84, I believe, 1784, when he invited me to attend with him the meeting at Fort Stanwix in New York to settle treaties between the local tribes there and the state of New York, as well as the members of the United States in Congress assembled. When he invited me, I was only going to proceed as far as Philadelphia, but we met with him in Baltimore, and he had curiously just received a rain cloak from a gum tree, and that had the quality of retaining papers that might have been, the cloak might have been wrapped in the newspapers of France. That's evidently what took place, because the journey from Baltimore to New York was spent on my part riding behind him and reading accounts from the Moniteur and the other papers in France that were still implanted upon his cloak at the time. And when we had arrived there, his enthusiasm, he was generous in accepting my French and making such alterations as would be requisite to be understood by a Frenchman. And we spent a great time in humor and observation of the new United States at that point. It had only been a few years since the conclusion of the Revolution, but already marks of independence were being witnessed in the various fields. Cows being fatted, and there used to be fences being mended, fields being more organized. And all of that was witnessed on our journey to New York City. And then I decided to remain with him after Philadelphia to New York City, and then to Fort Stanwix up there in northern New York. It was quite a time. His enthusiasm, of course, was just as rich as when I saw him last year. And he brought an entourage with him and began an examination of the elements of slavery here, and was not afraid to bring to my attention his considered remarks upon that institution. We talked about weather, we talked about the condition of the world, situation in France, and also his own personal affairs, which proved to be extraordinary to me, the kinds of things that he had to live with when he was in France. But the whole occasion was succeeded his visit to Monticello, I believe, and his acquaintance with Mr. Jefferson at the time. And then this past year, we've had opportunities to be with him during his sojourn in Charlottesville, and an entourage of individuals. I think James Barber had lent his carriage to bring the Marquis here. So we enjoyed his company in early September. A great deal has transpired in the country even since that time. Last month, in September here in 1825, we heard of the completion of the ditch that DeWitt Clinton had produced in New York. the great success of bringing products from Lake Erie over to the Hudson River and then south. We've heard of the new farming techniques that are taking place in Missouri. We heard about the successes of the Greeks and their operations against the control of the Turks in that part of the Mediterranean. We heard the succession of events in Spain, the constitutional monarchy that was supposed to have been established, but the efforts of Ferdinand VII to reduce the constitutionalists in numbers and to retain the monarchical nature of the Spanish government rather than making a constitutional monarchy. That was rather disturbing. And to hear Charles X, the brother of the late king, succeeding to the throne and assisting Spain in this endeavor. We heard about the uprisings in Pernambuco, the royalist efforts to retain control in Brazil, and the effort of his son, Don Pedro, to join with the localists in resisting the royalist forces there. We had an agent from Brazil, Maria Joseph Correa Gisera. Joseph Correa Gisera. I believe he was in your administration. I never know whether you got to meet him or not, but he an extraordinary representative of Brazilian interests in the United States and the accounts following of Bolivar's efforts still in South America. A great deal has transpired and tried to keep abreast of it as best we can here in Montpelier, but I'm not inclined to leave very often. So we're hoping we'll have visitors coming here to Montpelier rather than my having to go to visit them. Some, I believe, come to this house from Maryland, which is most extraordinary. We're hoping we might reconvene a society in that regard for years to come at this place. Yes. It's a delight to have you here. It's been some
I
time.
can do that. I enjoyed my time here just a few weeks ago when Lafayette arrived here as well. And he left for Culpeper thereafter. It was an amazing time on your property, sir.
Yes. We are both mutually acquainted with one another through the devices of our mutual friend, Mr. Jefferson.
I understand he is here this
We're
afternoon.
hoping that he may be attending at some point. It was through him that we met some years ago through correspondence, I think, about 1784. Well,
I beg your pardon, gentlemen, I do not know whether, having heard my name mentioned here, whether, suddenly, as I have just come in to visit, that it necessitates me entering into your company.
well, I can assure you that your arrival here has not been in vain.
Well, I appreciate it, and I fear that I've been somewhat tardy. But you know, you can never tell a horse when to arrive. And so quickly dismounting out of doors here, I beg your pardon for not divesting myself of my cloak, my duster. I know it may be somewhat inappropriate here in the company of two gentlemen so formally attired, but this is how I enjoy to ride through this delightful countryside and to greet you all once more. Colonel, if you will allow me to continue to refer to you so, I've known you most of your life, man.
Indeed, sir.
Yes, though.
You have indeed.
Yes, though, certainly pleased to be in the company of our nation's former president. I wish I was going to say, I wish I had been there last March the 4th to see you turn the gavel to Mr. Adams.
Well, yes, I was not there either, as a matter of fact.
It was an endearing moment. He's a dear friend and a well-educated man, and we will do well with him as a chief magistrate.
You know, I've known him since he was a young boy.
I know you have.
I did. I used to accompany he and his brother Charles, his sister Natty, to the opera in Paris. Yes, indeed, they were delightful. This, of course, when their parents were otherwise occupied.
Please find a seat, Mr. Jefferson. Rest those weary bones of yours.
Thank you for reminding me.
Join two other older men, too.
I will tell you, I have been all aflutter, as I presume we all have been, by the recent visitations of the esteemed hero of our American Revolution, esteemed hero of the French people themselves, General, the Marquis de Lafayette.
Huzzah, sir.
Huzzah, indeed. What a visit, and he provided us all for this a little more than a year that he attended throughout all of our states, 24, and thereby shaking the hand of the generations that are coming up now for our future that they might in essence shake the hand of history. I attest this to your brilliance, Mr. President.
You are too kind, sir.
Nay, indeed. You were the one who realized that with this young generation and the older now passing by the wayside increasingly with every ensuing year, they must know that the stories they have heard from their grandfathers and their fathers and their elder brothers and their uncles is fact, not fiction at all. And there was the general in flesh to bring it all home to them. Brilliant.
Brilliant indeed. The thought comes to my mind that in this year of 1825, those who were born 50 years ago, who were born at the outset of the Revolution, did not witness nor endure the passions and the thoughts and the many, many attitudes that were exhibited at the outset of the Revolution, the circumstances that brought it to fruition. They were mere babes at the time and probably very young with the writing of the Constitution. So their understanding of the period is what we have delivered to them, but the Marquis has done decidedly well. And the accounts of their own fathers and brothers and grandfathers, as you say. Please, let's be seated here.
Thank you, sir.
It's difficult for me to see over this picture assembly of the views here at Montpelier and be pleasantly distracted by your company, gentlemen. We have talked a little bit about the Marquis, and I don't think the story has been concluded with our brief remarks. But I am most anxious to know your assessment of that continuing institution of education at the University of Virginia. Such an arduous endeavor. I believe we started when you were governor, 78 for the proposal for education, for free education.
It did, and I would venture even before that, Mr. Madison. You were in Williamsburg at the time. This was after I had returned from Philadelphia, returned to Williamsburg itself that autumn of 76, and it was the next year in 77. And of course, I was not governor. Henry still was governor. And there was a committee formed. There are several of us. Thomas Woodward Lee, of course, and there was Mr. Ed Pennington, and there was Mr. Witt, and myself, to revise the monarchical code under which we were born and grew up. The Committee of Revisers, 126 revisals, and it was bill number 79 for the general diffusion of knowledge, in which I first entered what I hoped would be a universal system of education attended to by the poor as well as the wealthy, the female as well as the male. Remember how radical that idea was? And even the highest level of education to be provided. Now, I think the inception began in my mind much earlier, when I had the privilege of attending the old Royal College. Colonel?
Indeed.
Yes, which you attended as well, and then later to be able to read law together.
Exactly.
But even then, you may recall that I was suggesting a more universal system of education than a collegiate curriculum would allow. Universal, that it might grow as we discover new frontiers of knowledge upon the horizon. And so, gentlemen, how fortunate all of us to continue to live, to be able to see that in fruition. Did we think it would actually happen physically? When we met there on what is now the long October, it was 17. Any of you remember the precise date?
I do not. It's beyond my purview to recall those particular events. Please, remind me.
Well, I cannot remember. That's why I asked you, John.
It was 1817.
Pardon me?
It was 1817 that we laid the cornerstone.
1817, it was in the month of October. We were setting a cornerstone right there. There were 7 of us, and we were setting the cornerstone in front of what we, through my design, would refer to as pavilion number 7, to be the library very first and foremost. I cannot remember the date. It must have had 7 in its side.
The course of events that led to the laying of the cornerstone were numerous beforehand. Center College that was extant already in the city of village of Charlottesville. I hesitate to call it a city in advance its significance beyond its actual due course. But the establishment of Center College and the hope to build such an academy evolved into the concept of the University of Virginia. It was fraught with some objections of those members of the Virginia legislature who wanted to have the College of William and Mary be the predominant one, not to have an upstart. The location even of the university, we had to attend that meeting over the mountain there for those who wanted to have the University of Virginia established in Lexington instead. That Rockledge.
No, Rockfish Gap.
Rockfish Gap, as you were saying. I've got down there that often to know which kind of fish it was. But in any event, that being settled, also the financing became very important. You, of course, being the mentor and the promoter of such a university, included Mr. Monroe and myself, as well as a number of others, as the Board of Visitors, and seeking subscriptions from individuals around Virginia who would support that establishment. We had to appeal to the literary fund that was established in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I believe, in 1810. Funds that were being set aside for prospective projects in education, and we were able to allow for that. We needed loans from the national government, monies that were due to Virginia for their actions during the course of the Revolution, but they'd never been satisfied with the Assumption Bill, where the national government had to pay Virginia for the amount of money that they'd paid into the United States Congress and stuff. Just a host of matters. And of course, trying to bring it to fruition and open it finally in March. We've been some time in company with Mr. Gilpin, I think it is, who's been our representative in Europe trying to seek professors. And we were able to establish everything, of course, but the professor for law, hopefully, he may be able to rectify that situation.
I'm hopeful we will indeed, but already there's been a clatter amongst the boys there in respect to, of course, all of these gentlemen from foreign nations coming here to take the chairs of well, what we hope will be enlightening disciplines. These young men figure that it ought to be our own and be taking those chairs, but the whole purpose of our university is, of course, to grow upon the shoulders, stand upon the shoulders of the enlightenment of ages past. And who better to represent it than the esteemed dons of European universities?
So we had tried in Virginia. We had tried to secure Cooper and Mr. Shaw and a number of others, but before we could actually pay them the $1,500 per annum, which was what we intended to pay, they took positions at other colleges in North America. And so those individuals were inaccessible to our endeavor, and hence the reason for sending Mr. Gilpin to. Yes.
Very true. Well, how are you, Colonel? How have you been?
I'm fine, sir. I just related to our dear friend, President Madison, the fact that I have now become well acquainted with retirement these last 6 months at Oak Hill in Loudoun County, Virginia, just south of Leesburg. My wife and I decided about 4 years ago that we would make a decision between retaining our Highland property in the shadow of your wonderful home or taking residence at Oak Hill. And as you know, its distance, we at Oak Hill were only 35 miles from the federal city. Highland is 100 miles from the federal city. And often during my presidency over the 8 years, we often would retreat at Oak Hill to spend time to recoup and rebuild our spirits and prepare for the workload ahead during the course of the 8 years. And now that I am 67, I am not in a position to run 2 farms. And it's a sad decision, but one that's based in fact and practical knowledge about where we are in life. The property at Highland was always intended to be my retirement home. But as you know, my 4 terms as governor of Virginia, my 2 ambassadorships to France, and numerous other political offices kept me from having a major management position at my own estate. I didn't have time to devote to the management of farm practices, and therefore, the onus is upon me, but my farm managers didn't do a very good job. The yields of the crops weren't good, although you paid me very favorable compliments saying that my wheat was superior to other wheat crops from neighbors in the area. I think you were just kind because of our friendship. But nevertheless, I will be selling Highland, and I hope that that will be in the coming year, and that we will spend our retirement years at Oak Hill. But nevertheless, the distance between us, both spiritually, both in physical distance, and both the longevity of our friendship will last an eternity, and we'll always be dear friends, and we will visit you often. So do not be afraid that I will be lacking contact with either you or Mr. Madison.
Well, I certainly hope not. We are already missing you in the neighborhood. And when you speak the number of years we had left now, 67 years of age, you're still a baby. You're still a baby, Colonel. And I hope that what you are telling us is indeed the general rule for your move. I would not like to think that before you ascended to that highest office, that simply because I may have proved the more victorious in games of chess that we had in the neighborhood, that you would not think you might have to succumb by coming home to Elmore.
I've always figured it's a 28-mile advantage I have in playing chess with you. And the amount of time you took to take a move on that chess board allowed me to farm 3 or 4 of my fields.
I had to be cautious, Mr. Madison. After all, the chess set, as you know, Colonel, is a gift from you. Well, I didn't know that there might be anything mechanical underneath the board.
Services, Mr. Monroe, we become glib, perhaps, and we become perhaps removed from those events at the outset of the revolution. And as we pointed out earlier, the nature of those living today would have to be at least 50 years old to have been born at that time. And their recollection of the event, again, is rather removed from the actual events. The accounts that they have received were summations of what had actually taken place, rather than necessarily all the controversies and all the preparations that were made, both for those committees in Philadelphia and your illustrious hand at that time, but also inculcating into the American people a spirit of independence which many were not prepared to consider, and the necessary blood that was shed, and the properties that were lost, the investment of time in one's reputations, all put at risk at the outset of the war. And I confess, I'm given to moments of reflection of those times, and the uncertainty of it all prompts me to have a much better appreciation of our country now, and certainly that was revitalized with the arrival of the Marquis. And I think we can all three agree the influence of a gentleman arriving to this country at such a tender age, affording all the finances for him to engage in his position. Being a general at 21 is not what we all would have anticipated. In fact, I think I remarked offhand that instead of being called a general, he should be called a specific, because general seems to be too diffused in terms of his concerns with the troops. But specific would be indicating his attention to those in the various trenches at Monmouth and Burnaby Line and other such places.
Do you recall, Colonel, it was in your company where I first met General the Marquis de Lafayette, the both of you together, being able to inform me, as I was governor of our Commonwealth at the time, of the advance of the enemy up the James River. And of course, we had already removed our capital of government from the ancient seat there in Williamsburg to be better protected during the war on the heights of Richmond. Always vulnerable to enemy attack, either sailing up the James or the York north above it to attack that high ground. Richmond, of course, high ground, but it was only the one river you could see directly down there. And I remember distinctly when I received the information from you all there in Richmond. Oh, mercy. You know, I was the last occupant of the governor's palace in Williamsburg. And when we moved our capital to Richmond, I took up residence as governor in former Caller's Tavern. A tavern. And of course, our government, our new House of Delegates, was meeting in a tobacco barn at that time. But we were forewarned of the advance of, how could we ever forget him leading the enemy up the James?
Arnold.
Benedict Arnold. Who would have thought? I received that information from the king. And we knew then we are in a very dire strait. We need to remove our capital still. And therefore we felt that Charlottesville would be so far west in the hinterlands, the enemy would never find it there. That is one of the reasons why when I oversaw the removal of the archives from the Public Records Office building in Williamsburg, I ordered those crates upon wagons to proceed westward down the Duke of Gloucester Street, past Richmond, into the wilderness, that they might find their protection and safety at Montpelier. So far in the wilderness, the enemy would never find it, and then look what happened. They attacked Richmond, and they made their way, at least the dragoons, with orders from Tarleton, to seek to capture the House of Delegates in Charlottesville, but we avoided them, the majority avoided.
You outfoxed it, sir.
Well, but I cannot help but thank you again and again for informing us there initially, and helped incidental in the company of the Marquis.
I had served as your military commissioner to Virginia between General Nathaniel Greene and your office to apprise you of Lord Cornwallis's movements throughout North Carolina, and then when he began to make his movements into Virginia. It was a very heady time, and I think it was a great service to have members of our staff serve as couriers and have a refreshing horse at each location so that the messages could be relayed over the course of many, many miles to Richmond.
Exactly.
Mr. Jefferson, I think you may be a bit modest, at least amongst your two friends, at the consequences of those actions that were taken in leaving Richmond and making your way to Montpelier. You were the object of great calumny and animadversions for the decisions you had made during the course of the war during that time, accusations that were later rescinded when the evidence became known to the legislature. The charges against you could be nothing but upsetting to a gentleman who devoted so much for the revolution, and to be consequently derided by young upstarts for being inadequate to the moment, whereas Mr. Monroe and I both know the nature and spirit of that moment, which is so very, very difficult.
Well, I thank you, gentlemen. I thank you in particular, Mr. Madison, for that recognition. But those 2 years, rightly that a governor of our Commonwealth should never secede himself. I served the 2 years, and then later, if it is the will of the franchise to re-elect him to come back. But no, they were not 2 of the happiest years in my entire life. I can safely say that. And when we reflect upon our revolution, can we not help but wonder, when we were there in Philadelphia, where the first to draft a declaration, to pass it out of my hands, no further word to the other 4 gentlemen on the committee, to think that in that first draft I could be writing our death warrant. To think that the 56 ultimately who signed on the 2nd of August, Mr. Matlock's fine and exquisite penmanship, that we could have been signing our death warrant as well. And it will follow us, it certainly does me. How did we accomplish it? And I hope we're all resigned, particularly as we have been discussing.
The course of events that transpired at that time, again, the passion, the consequences of action, have now proceeded in the annals of history to be events that were passing despite accounts of difficulty. The next generation is left with the results of what had happened, which turned out favorably for the United States. But the experiment of government that we have has founded on principles and debates, considerations, perspectives, attitudes, opinions that are a reflection of the general eclectic nature of the American body politic and the success of such a sovereignty being dependent upon the multitude of opinions that can be expressed freely by individuals, by the nature of the individuals they choose for Congress. It's this consideration, the rejuvenation of those debates, those actions taken both at the outset of the revolution and at the onset of our new government in 1789, that hopefully will not be lost to subsequent generations, that they perhaps merely refer to them as events passing in the past, but have little bearing upon their own futures. And I suspect that we are one of the few individuals left of that period who can be looked to. There was a discussion earlier this year about a meeting in Stanton to revise the Virginia Constitution. And I did not receive an invitation to attend. And I thought perhaps with my experience in matters of government, and however modest they may be, that I thought I might be at least included in that discussion. But the opinions of those who passed an age to advanced states of age are less considered because of the public's consideration that their times are unique to our times. And as a consequence, it requires an entirely different address of government and the actions of government and the concerns about that. Men were mere boys when the Constitution was prepared. So what did they know? The influence of ecclesiastic studies, the government, the writings of Locke, of Montesquieu, Algernon, and a host of others, Hume, in matters of this kind of government formation. I don't think that they read them quite sedulously as did we.
A very, very deep point to ponder, and yet at the same time, let us hope that they will simply continue to read, and to remember that no matter how long ago these individuals were writing their thoughts based upon the opinions and facts of previous generations. And therefore that the current generation, remembering that history, I'd never forget in their read that history should always be the first and foremost read, particularly because the earth will always belong to the living generation. The dead have no power over us. They're gone, as we will be soon. Well, me, sooner than the two of you. And therefore, a child of 14 certainly cannot wear the same clothes at the age of 40. And my point is that our laws and institutions must continue to grow as we grow as the people. And as you know, Mr. Madison, I was not too enamored hearing about the work of the Constitutional Convention. I certainly was not there. I was still in France, nonetheless serving our nation. And thank heaven for that letter that you sent to me. Still have it, November 1787, in which you included the draft of this new Constitution. I know you realize, Colonel, as I say often in the past, I thought the Articles of Confederation were a venerable fabric. They ought not to be tampered with. But when I read that Constitution, Mr. Madison, do you recall my reply?
I'm sure you were very hopeful for its successful completion.
I was captivated by it. Captivated. The shortest document of its kind in human history. Creating a government to check its own power. That does not happen in monarchy, as we know it. And of the three branches, some say coexist equally. Well, what is the first line of our Constitution? So extraordinarily powerful.
We the people.
We the people. That is. That's the most influential of the three branches. The legislative body.
Gentlemen, are we relegated to spend our waning days looking at the Virginia sunset over the mountains to the west, and perhaps as much as we would despair of the prospects of the future and celebrate the equally favorable prospects of the future. I'm afraid I'm left to considering the generosity you paid me by selling me the plateware that when you moved to France and had the M on it, which facilitated considerably my being able to satisfy my wife's predilection to increase her chinaware. At least something comes of value from the times we spent with one another.
Mrs. Monroe and I enjoyed that process.
Well, I cannot help but acknowledge a number of individuals who have obtruded upon our conversation, gentlemen. I hope we have not said anything that would compromise their reputations in their minds. I reflect upon you suggesting the brevity of the Constitution. There was not some concern from moment to moment when I thought how many would be having to study that document, and I wanted to make it as easy as possible.
Well, you've ever been renowned for your code of hospitality, Mr. Madison, so I'm not surprised at the many who are gathered have come great distances here to visit with you. And maybe you can afford them to stay overnight and maybe several nights. So I have time to get back to Monticello before they may arrive there.
And on that note, we're actually going to bring the audience into this conversation now.
Mr. Madison, I'm wondering if you could comment on your trials and tribulations with Patrick Henry in the ratification of the Constitution and inserting the Bill of Rights.
Yes. I fear it would be perhaps inappropriate, if not indelicate, to animadvert upon the character of the gentleman who is no longer here to defend himself. Mr. Henry's contribution to the revolution we have just been discussing was profound. He is artful in his language, persuasive in his presentation, and had a great deal to do with inflaming moderate minds to the necessities at hand. He was governor of Virginia for a long while. He served a very difficult time, as did Mr. Jefferson and Governor Nelson. So to put into perspective the nature of my difficulty with him has to be preceded by an appreciation for the contributions he made at the origins of our country. Once the nation had secured the successes in the Revolution, the treaty was signed in 1783, the nation was very much at 6 7/7. The colonies had become states, sovereign unto themselves, and the effort to assemble them into a league or confederation was important for the safety of all of them. There were times when sections of the north, the central part of the northeastern states, or the south, had thought about dividing themselves from the sentiments of the other two parties of the confederation that was being assembled, that their interests were so unique from the other two that they would separate. In trying to avoid that, the success of all 13 states was dependent, each state was dependent on the other 12. And that is why the Confederation was commenced. We had just finished a war trying to eliminate a monarch from asserting a general authority over the people to such a degree as to deny them their own self-government. So when the effort to create a constitution, to formalize the union of the states, to separate in the minds of the people and those representing the people, that there is a distinction between having 13 sovereign states flailing away at issues both domestic and foreign, domestic and national, that the collusion of their efforts might be made in such a way to make a distinction between national issues and state issues. And that distinction then was to identify a national government with limited authority to deal with national issues that no one state or group of states could address, and then leave all other matters in the hands of the states. When the ratification convention met in June of 1788, and Mr. Henry was in attendance, he was very skeptical about a committee meeting in Philadelphia in 1787 to spend 4 months in drafting a constitution for the United States and submitting it to the United States Congress assembled in New York. He was skeptical that those individuals would be able to embrace the partisanship and the partiality that would be known in each of the states, distinguished from all the other states. He was recognizing that for the states to become collective as a union of states, a union that separates national issues from state issues, that the states, the sovereign states that had become after the war, would have to give up a degree of that sovereignty that dealt with foreign issues. We had, during the 1780s, states sending ambassadors, several ambassadors to France, or to Spain, or to Holland, to secure their benefit for their states. These ambassadors are competing with one another. We had British troops on the western borders that should have been removed in 1783, and they were not there. They were exciting the hostilities of tribes. We had states such as New York and Georgia that were dealing with Indian nations, and no consistent manner by which those issues were being addressed by the several states. There were a host of problems among states. Maryland, Virginia, the control of the Potomac River. Who had authority over the Potomac River? Who had authority in the Chesapeake for the fisheries there? These kinds of issues are facing the nation in the 1780s. And in examining the Confederation and its suggestion, it was led that we should write a constitution that allows the distinction of a limited national government and freedom for the state governments. I say this as preface to remarking about Mr. Henry. Because when the ratification convention met in June of 1788, Mr. Henry found all manner of issues with this new constitution. He was, in my mind, picking at a lot of different straws. And the nature of calling them fine, fat federal tax collectors and phrases such as that are inflammatory to inflame the members of that convention, 178 of them, to resist any recognition of national issues. It was a convention that he actually offered to participate, to call for, but would not become a member himself of that convention in 1787. He seemed to be doing everything to thwart the nature of this new government. And in that respect, he and I were adversaries. We had mentioned from a mechanical point of view, the convention was supposed to be conducted with point by point, the Constitution as one goes through the document. And he immediately begins with quite a diatribe on various aspects of all the Constitution rather than following the regularity of attention we had agreed upon. So to engage in that kind of activity was somewhat confusing. It certainly was exacerbated in my mind after the convention was over. And he made remarkable efforts to form congressional districts in Virginia. He formed one that consisted of 8 counties. 2 of them were Orange County, and the other one was Spotsylvania County. Now, he had to include those 2 counties, even though they voted to ratify the Constitution in the Virginia Convention in 1788. But these 6 other counties he included had all voted consistently against ratifying the Constitution. He was trying to place my eligibility into a district that was heavily weighted against the Constitution. He also sought to be in a precarious situation by nominating one of the most prominent men in Spotsylvania County, and a friend of mine, Mr. Monroe. And Mr. Monroe and I contending for the first seat in Congress for that district. He had already dismissed my prospects of being a senator for Virginia, 3 being nominated, and I was the 3rd. They only taken 2 at the time. Mr. Grayson and Mr. Henry Lee as the first senators in Virginia. The nature of his objections, his forming these districts, of disallowing in Virginia the ability of one individual to represent a different district in Virginia, which the Constitution allowed, and we would not do so. These matters, along with many others, caused us to be political opponents to one another. He was, I think, somewhat upset with with a rather effective, studious, and competent ability on my part to present the Constitution, and resented me for it, I think. But I held the same resentment for his extraordinary ability to discourse in public and sway the most unconvinced individuals to his point of view. A commendable trait, to be sure. So there was one point, I remember in the 1790s, perhaps we might recommence our correspondence with one another. He had already defended the United States government in 1792 in a court case involving the United States government. And Henry spoke well of the government at that point. I had gone through my correspondence in 1796 to see where the conclusion of our correspondence had actually taken place, and found that I was not the last one to write a letter, and that by that time I was not very excited about reacquainting myself with an epistolary relationship with Mr. Henry. He died in '98, if I recall, and those are tumultuous times for their own reasons, so it was never recommenced at the time. Respect for Mr. Henry and his contributions to the Revolution, unequivocal. His objections and the obstacles he placed before uniting the United States, and I would think would be an effective way, was disturbing. That's the short answer.
I have two quick questions. If President Jefferson could tell us about his visit to William Shakespeare's home. And I find it interesting that President Madison, talk about the necessity, and yet when you sat here and thought of the necessity of a new form of government, but you were the only one. Everyone else thought they were updating the Articles of Confederation, and you show up with a whole new idea of government. How did you sit here and think of that? But first, I'd like to hear about William Shakespeare's house.
You must, if you are not so entertained here at Mr. Madison's house, because he has a wonderful and complete edition of the works of the great bard. And oftentimes we want to quote lines and scenes back and forth, one and the other. Your lady, at times, even to engage some little...
Not the marriage of true minds into repentance.
There you are. And of course, I pride myself with a very lovely, well, several actually, complete editions of the works of Mr. Shakespeare that I frequently refer to. I grew up with him as an inspiration. Many have said that even in the drafting of our Declaration of American Independence, it follows a Shakespearean cadence as a rallying call, almost like that of Henry V. If you would. When Mr. Adams, already commissioned Minister Plenipotentiary at the court of the late King George III, invited me to come over and be with him in London, for there would be an opportunity for the gathering of ambassadors of all European kingdoms to be there for negotiating and signing new treaties of trade, that this would be most beneficial to our nation if two minister plenipotentiaries were there. So I immediately sailed over, and I lived there but a short distance from the Adams, Cadogan Square, and we kept waiting and waiting for the invitation to be welcomed into the cabinets of Parliament to begin negotiation, and it became apparent after a time maybe they did not care to have the two of us together at one time. So we decided to take, as the French say, a vacation, and we set out, if you will, on a journey through the Midlands, northwest of London. I think collectively it was about 2.5, 3 weeks. And on that distance, yes, we made our way to Stratford-upon-Avon. Now, I know that Mrs. Adams has recounted a moment that I will never forget, neither will she. And now that I pronounce it, perhaps everyone here will not forget it as well, that when the carriage made its way there into the market square of Stratford-upon-Avon, as she says. Mr. Jefferson quickly alighted, bent down, and kissed the ground. Here it was. We found ourselves in the birthplace of the great poet. And yes, we went to visit his house. We went to visit his grave. There's great speculation whether he is really there. But you know, many of the church attendants, many of those who take you through these houses, they feel that you will present them with more of a token if they have far too much information to deliver to you. I think that's true. And so the point of the matter is, when we were in the house where it is said he passed away, where it is said, Mr. Adams and I found ourselves alone for a moment in a room, along with a chair we had recently been told was the chair in which he breathed his last. And by the smile upon your physiognomy, I think you know the rest of it. And you want me to make that known publicly, yes. It was not me alone. You know that. You know what I'm going to refer to, gentlemen?
I have completely forgotten all of that information.
Well, maybe it's best I just stand right there. We cut off a piece of the chair. Cut off a piece of the chair. It was all. I'll show it to you when you come to Monticello. Mr. Adams, he's 600 miles away, but I know he'd be proud to show it to you. They have feasting. So, does that comply with you? So you got it out.
My reply will be much more mundane than Mr. Jefferson. You asked about the nature of considering an alteration of government. For one thing, the list of issues that addressed our young nation at the beginning, including financial debts the nation had incurred, the specific states had incurred, the free use of the Mississippi River, negotiation of the Jagardaki Treaty, the efforts for one state to negotiate the rights of other states for their own benefit, commerce with Spain, a host of issues that confronted our young nation. And the question is, was the formation of a confederated government, a confederation government, the most appropriate and most efficacious in settling these issues amongst the states and the collective issues of the states together? I did an examination of that, the defects, the vices of the Confederation, to point out where the Confederation was short on its ability to meet these issues. I also undertook a rather repeat examination of the Aegean League, the Lycian League, the Ionic League in Greece, the Confederated States of Greece at the time, the Kalmar League in Scandinavian countries, the Helvetic League in Switzerland, the United States of Holland, the 11 counties and 11 provinces of the Netherlands. These are examples of confederations. The examination not only included where the successes of some of those confederations take place, such as the Helvetic League in Switzerland, that have such a division of the mountains that the confederation works there because of the topography of the land. The accounts of the 11 provinces of Holland showed that because there weren't topographical difficulties, they had the uprisings in Rotterdam and confusion in the Dutch provinces with one another. The Scandinavian League, the Kalmar League. These are all examples of successes and failures due to the topography, and as well as other factors, but generally the topography. The Greek city-states examined offered also a different point of view as to how confederated states can work together to propose a suitable government for their collective existence. And in those examinations, one finds that the larger states, the larger city-states, had more influence and had more to say about what the collective group was going to decide upon, rather than having each city-state having an equal share in the deliberations of their confederated government. This prompts one to consider that if we are a confederated government, Virginia was 7 times the size of Delaware. Should we not then have 7 times the influence over what was being done in the United States of Congress assembled? Should not all those states comport with Virginia, as Mr. Henry had actually pointed out? Because Virginia was the largest and supplied the greatest minds in those deliberations at that time. It's not to diminish others, but we certainly had a number of representatives who were very well read and very well spoken. So the influence of Virginia, just following the Confederated experience, should have been greater than all the other states put together. When you find that the topography of the United States is a little bit different than the Dutch city-states, our problems with the broad expanse of the country along the Atlantic coast, and trying to have some kind of centrality to states that had their peculiarities and their particulars, are different from one another, and yet had a vested interest in becoming a United States of America. These were all the considerations that led to the writing and preparation of the Constitution. In terms of its legitimacy, as you succinctly pointed out, that it was supposed to really revise the Articles of Confederation. And some who would suggest that that was the sole object would only refer to some of the instructions from the United States and Congress assembled to that committee meeting in Philadelphia in 1787. But the instructions included, and letters also indicated, or to revise the government in such a way as to make it more convenient and compatible with the needs of the nation. Not merely to revise the articles, but to suggest any such action that would improve the relationships amongst the states with one another and improve the collective interests of the United States to foreign nations abroad. This is not singular with myself. There were others who thought the same way. James Wilson in Pennsylvania. There were thinkers that addressed to one degree or another. Colonel Mason was aware. There were individuals from Princeton, the College of New Jersey, where I was, and New Bedford, and others, who had similar outlooks. They just perhaps had not articulated it quite as greatly. So where some would call me the father of the Constitution, I think it's probably an inflated view of my actions taken during that time. I was one of many who assisted in the formation of the Constitution. One of many who assisted its ratification. One of many who considered the addition of Bill of Rights afterwards. I am very proud and will not underestimate the fact that I was party to or witness to those major events during those years. If that qualifies me to be a father, then I'm surprised how many children I have. But the nature of preparing the nation's government to be more adequate, to be more efficacious, to be more compatible with the spirit of independence, liberty, fraternity, equality. All of these matters entered into my disposition to it. And I felt obligatory to prepare that on paper in the Virginia report that was handed in by Governor Randolph at the time.
So we have one last question for today.
What do you think of Thomas Paine's Common Sense pamphlet?
To all of us, sir, to all of us, our opinion upon Mr. Paine's Common Sense goes, and then there are his natural rights that follow that. You remember that, Mr. Payne. The most felicitous pen I have ever known. And many wondered where such common sense came from to flow from his pen. Was it him initially? What author may he have known and conversed with at length? What book had he read which remained so influential? Where did this all come from? And he said, I should never forget, I heard it in the inns and ordinaries of North America, from the common man, common sense. I can only say with respect to me, regardless of his opinions in anything, regardless of what his opinion might have been upon matters religious, he did understand the common man. He understood the hearts of all of us here in this nation and what could unite us and bring us together. And when many ask about our declaration, and they ask those who come visit to shake my hand, as they call me a genius, who could have come up with such thoughts? Well, maybe some have read as I have written, and he knew well, I am no genius. I've never come up with one new or original thought. It was not our business to come up with anything new or original. Rather, to reiterate, resuscitate, rejuvenate man's eternal struggle for freedom from time immemorial worldwide. And besides that, in 76, lamentably, many had not heard of those whose works have influenced our declaration. They had not heard of Aristotle, Cicero, Algernon Sidney, John Locke, Adam Smith, and Thomas Paine. So, realizing that many could not read, what I had to do was shed the lofty sophisms of those ancient authors, even that of Paine in particular, and explain it in clear and simple terms as an expression of the American mind.
I concur with President Jefferson. My later experience with Thomas Paine wasn't as quite as complimentary. You may know that he was imprisoned in France during my ambassadorship as U.S. ambassador to France, 1794, 1797, and I was able to secure his release, but he became kind of a nuisance to me. I had to walk a very thin line between a Federalist government, and for those who don't know, the Federalists are those that favor strong control of the federal level of government, less state power. I am ascribed often, although I don't believe in political parties, I'm ascribed to the Democrat-Republican Party or anti-federalists who support a stronger state system of government. So while I was there, I was the only member of Washington's cadre of diplomats that really supported a different party, if you can describe me to be associated with the party. I was looked down upon, although I was recommended. I wasn't the initial recommendation for the ambassador to France, but others had turned them down, and so Washington turned towards me since I had served during his time as Commander-in-Chief during the American Revolution. So we knew each other very well, but there was suspicion about my loyalties. Many felt I was too close to the French and wouldn't respect that important neutrality between those two nations. Great Britain and France had been warring for many, many years. And Paine caused some measure of discomfort in my trying to secure his release and also maintain a diplomatic front. I had to walk a very thin line, and I needed no one to cause controversy. So there was some controversy. He lived with me for a while, and after time we had to part ways. But he's a great man, and those were later comments from someone who was associated with him in a later part of life. But as Mr. Jefferson has related, his works with common sense were so important to the founding of our nation. Great man.
One may also reflect, as one may with Mr. Henry, that Mr. Paine was probably to writing and Mr. Henry was to oratory. When you have a rather succinct question, where is the justification for an island to rule over a continent? It brings home a great deal of the oddities and absurdities that were extant at the time. And in but a few phrases, often rearranged and expressed to the American people. Certainly, it did not take Colonel Monroe or Mr. Jefferson or myself to see the logic of it. As Mr. Jefferson says, the common man could understand that kind of curious question. And although in so many instances, what we do at one time may have altered over the course of time as we're engaged in other events. Certainly I began with a great respect for Mr. Henry, certainly a commendation for the contributions Paine wrote on the rights of man as well as in the common sense. The effect upon the American people was dramatic. It's perhaps unfortunate that sometimes later in our lives we do things which are perhaps less credible, less to be celebrated. But as much we may denigrate one another for our later acts as we become more adult, and as we become more wise and we commit more mistakes, we shouldn't neglect entirely the contributions made as young men when we were enthusiastic and had the cause right side. Thank you for your question.
Well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you three presidents for being with us here today.